Before America was born, before a single flag was raised, warriors rode beneath endless skies. They were the Sioux who defied empires, the Navajo who walked through death to come home, the Iroquois who built the first democracy, the Apache who vanished into the mountains rather than bow. Their names were whispered in fear and awe until history tried to erase them. But not tonight. Tonight, their stories rise again. Comment below where you're watching from. Let the world see how far their spirit still travels. Now, listen carefully. This is the untold story of the nations that refused to die. Long before European sails cut across the ocean, the land of North America was sacred and whole. The Sioux, children of Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, believed that every river, rock, and buffalo was alive with divine breath. They were not rulers of the land, but its children, walking softly across it, guided by the whispers of wind and ancestors. From the Mississippi River, their ancestors wandered into the forests of north-central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin. The year was near 800 AD, when the earth was still untouched by the foreign hand. There, under the open skies, they found their home, a world bound by the rhythm of nature and the silent power of spirit. By 1300 AD, the Sioux had become more than a people. They had become a family of nations. Around sacred fires, elders gathered to form the Ochethi Shakoving, the Seven Council Fires, a confederation that bound their future. Each fire burned for one of their tribes, a symbol of unity beneath the Great Plains sky. The Seven Council Fires would one day speak in three voices: Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. These dialects became their songs of identity. The Lakota roamed the wide grasslands of North and South Dakota, the Dakota settled in Minnesota and Nebraska, while the Nakota found home in the hills of Montana. Together, they were the Sioux, proud, fearless, and free. The Sioux learned to live as the plains lived, moving with the seasons, chasing the migrations of buffalo herds that thundered like storms across the earth. They built homes of hide and wood, teepees, light enough to fold and carry, strong enough to stand against the wind. Horses, brought centuries earlier by the Spanish, became their wings upon the prairie. Buffalo meat fed their families, hides became their clothing, and bones shaped their weapons. To the Sioux, nothing in nature was wasted. In the glow of campfires, songs rose into the dark night. Carrying gratitude to Wakantanka, for the spirit of life flowed through every living thing. Family was the heartbeat of Sioux life. A child was called Wakangyeja, a sacred being, for they carried the future of the tribe in their laughter. Men hunted and defended, women nurtured, taught, and guided. A man could marry more than one wife, but only if his strength could feed them all. The hunt was sacred, governed by rules older than memory. To break those laws was to offend the buffalo spirit itself. A careless hunter could find his tent torn down by the people, a lesson burned into pride. In every sunrise, the Sioux saw purpose, a duty to the family, the herd, and the spirit world that watched unseen. To be a Sioux warrior was not just to fight, but to live with courage. They called their warriors Akichita, the protectors. Riding on horseback, bow in hand, they fought with fierce grace. The open plains were both their battlefield and their classroom. Before battle, they prayed and painted their faces with sacred colors, red for blood, white for purity, black for the unknown. Wounds given in war were not shame but honor, and some warriors cut their own flesh during mourning to show devotion. The Sioux believed sacrifice brought them closer to Wakantanka and bound their spirits to the eternal circle. The winds of change came with sails and iron. In the winter of 1660, French explorers Radisson and de Groseilliers crossed into what is now Wisconsin. They met the Sioux, tall, proud, and wary of strangers bearing gifts and guns. The French sought furs. The Sioux sought balance with the earth. But trade was a dangerous fire. The Ojibwe, Cree, and Assiniboine tribes also traded with the French, and rivalry turned to blood. By the 1720s, the forests echoed with the clash of muskets and war cries. In 1736, the Dakota Sioux lost their lands near Leech Lake and Mille Lacs, driven south along the Mississippi. The age of peace was fading. The Sioux found themselves surrounded by enemies, traitors, and the endless hunger of empires. The French clung to alliances, but by 1763 their flag fell, and the British rose in their place. The Sioux were left to fight for their survival, while European traders whispered promises on both sides. The buffalo still roamed, but the white man's roads and rifles followed close behind. Every truce signed in smoke was soon broken in blood. The Sioux fought not just for land, but for spirit, for the right to breathe free beneath the endless sky of their ancestors. When the United States was born, the Sioux were already a nation older than its flag. But the new settlers came in waves: farmers, soldiers, railways, and greed. The buffalo herds dwindled, hunted not for food, but for sport. By the mid-19th century, famine crept into the Sioux camps. The treaties promised peace, but delivered pain. By 1858, the Dakota Sioux were confined to a small patch of land along the Minnesota River, cut off from their hunting grounds. Payments came late or never at all. Hunger turned to anger, and in 1862, the Dakota War began. A desperate fight for survival against the rising tide of colonization. The year 1876 burned in the Sioux memory like fire. The Black Hills, promised to them by treaty, had been invaded by gold seekers. When the U.S. Army came to force them into submission, two leaders rose, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Together, they united thousands of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho in one great camp. On June 25, 1876, under the sun of Montana, they met Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry. The battle was fierce and short. The white soldiers fell like grass before a storm. Custer and his men were slain to the last. The victory at Little Bighorn would become legend. The day the Sioux defied an empire, victory could not last forever. By December 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek, American troops massacred hundreds of Sioux men, women, and children, the last cry of the plains echoing into silence. The Sioux Nation's resistance was broken, but its spirit endured. Through the centuries that followed, they fought again, not with arrows, but with words and law. Even in 2018, they refused $1 billion compensation, demanding the return of their sacred land instead. Today, in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Montana, the descendants of the 7 Council Fires still stand, proud, wounded, and unbroken beneath the same eternal sky. Long before the first musket echoed through the forests of the Northeast, the Iroquois lived in a land of rivers and towering oaks. They hunted deer, fished the lakes, and gathered the fruits of the earth. Yet for generations, war had torn them apart, tribe against tribe, blood against blood. Then came a vision, a promise of peace. The people called him Deganawida, the peacemaker, and beside him walked Hiawatha, his chosen voice. Together, they spoke of unity and reason, of ending the endless vengeance that soaked the soil. Thus began the seed of what would grow into the Great League of Peace, a confederacy that would forever change North America. Around the year 1600, the dream took form. The Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca gathered near Lake Ontario and along the Mohawk River in what is now New York State. There they bound themselves by a sacred law, the Great Law of Peace. Each nation lit its council fire, and together they became one family. Their chiefs met beneath the Tree of Peace, burying their weapons beneath its roots. The Iroquois Confederacy was born, the first great democracy of the land, a government of councils, balance, and voices joined in unity rather than bloodshed. Time moved like a river, carrying new nations toward the League's light. In 1722, the Tuscarora people, driven from the Carolinas by war and settlers, journeyed northward and found refuge among the Five Nations. They were welcomed as younger brothers. With the Tuscarora's arrival, the Five Nations became six, a circle complete once again. From then on, the League was known as the Six Nations, its strength echoing across forests, rivers, and mountains. They were no longer scattered tribes. They were the Iroquois Confederacy, a power both respected and feared. But peace within did not mean peace beyond. In the mid-1600s, the Iroquois turned their eyes westward toward the Ohio Valley. The land was rich in fur, the currency of power in the age of Europe's hunger. These became the Beaver Wars, fought to control the beaver trade with the Dutch and later the British. From the Great Lakes to the Ohio River, the Iroquois conquered rival tribes, driving out the Huron, Erie, and others. Entire nations fled before them. Yet, in their triumph, they also sowed fear, for no power rises without shadow, and the Iroquois grew both mighty and marked by blood. When the first white flags of empire arrived, French, Dutch, and British, each sought the Iroquois as allies. The French traded through the Great Lakes, but the Iroquois favored the English, who came through Albany, New York. To the Confederacy, alliances were tools, not chains. Still, peace with one meant war with another. The Iroquois raided French settlements and struck deep into Canada. Some among them, moved by missionaries, turned to the French faith, Catholicism, and split away. But the League itself endured, playing the game of empire like seasoned warriors at council fire. To the Iroquois, family was the root of all strength. Their homes, great longhouses made from saplings and elm bark, sheltered many families under one roof. Inside, the warmth of the fire was the heart of the clan. Women were the keepers of the earth, the life-givers, the decision-makers. In Iroquois society, when a man married, he moved into his wife's home, and the children carried her lineage. It was she who chose the chiefs and could remove them when they lost honor. Through her wisdom, peace endured. While many European nations silenced their women, the Iroquois revered theirs. A mother's voice could overturn a war decision. Her council determined how food was stored, distributed, or given to the poor. She was the silent law that bound the League. The Iroquois believed that women carried the same spiritual power as the earth, the ability to give life, sustain it, and reclaim it. To harm a woman was to offend the very land that fed them. It was a truth older than the colonists' laws and stronger than their iron. When the winds of the American Revolution began to howl, the Iroquois stood between two worlds, Britain and the rising colonies. Some, like the Oneida and Tuscarora, sided with the colonists. Others, like the Mohawk and Seneca, remained loyal to Britain, their oldest ally. In 1779, George Washington sent the Sullivan Expedition under General John Sullivan and Colonel Daniel Brodhead to burn the Iroquois villages in western New York. Fields were torched, homes destroyed, and food stores left to rot. The tree of peace trembled under the weight of war. When the revolution ended, the new United States turned its back on promises. The Iroquois who had fought beside the British found themselves landless and betrayed. The League, once a shining model of unity, fractured beneath hunger and grief. Many survivors fled to Canada, founding new homes in Oka and Kanawake. There they farmed, built boats, and sold snowshoes and baskets to survive. Yet the greatness of their past lingered, a flame burning low but not extinguished. Though centuries passed and the League's lands were lost, the wisdom of the Iroquois lived on. When men like Benjamin Franklin and James Madison studied the Iroquois council system, they saw the future, a model of federalism, balance, and democratic voice. The great law of peace had given birth to something greater, the framework of the United States Constitution itself. The Iroquois Confederacy may have fallen, but their spirit rose again in the very nation that once took their land. They remain the keepers of the great law, the first democracy of the New World. Before any empire rose, before the name America was spoken, the Navajo told of an origin deeper than time. They said their people had journeyed through 3 dark worlds before emerging into the 4th, the luminous world. Guided by colors, black, blue, and yellow, they climbed through each realm, leaving shadows behind until light touched their faces. Their story was not only myth but memory, a way to explain their bond with creation. Every mountain, river, and rock held meaning. The Navajo believed they were shaped by sacred forces, born to walk in balance between the earth and the sky. When the Navajo finally emerged into the 4th world, they came upon the La Plata Mountains in what is now southwestern Colorado. There, the gods set their boundaries, 4 sacred mountains to protect them from harm. To the east rose Blanca Peak, to the north stood Hesperus Peak, to the south Mount Taylor, and to the west, the San Francisco Peaks. Within these mountains, the Navajo found safety and purpose. They called this place Dine Bikeya, the land of the people, where all was secure beneath the watch of the gods. The gods, in their mercy, gave not only mountains but rivers, flowing guardians of the sacred homeland. Among them was the San Juan River, whose waters glimmered like a silver snake beneath the sun. It became a line of power and protection, a boundary of both spirit and land. To the Navajo, the world was a web of meaning. The 4 mountains were living beings, the rivers were their veins. To live rightly within these borders was to live in harmony, a principle called Hoju, meaning beauty, balance, and peace. In the 1600s, as Spanish armies swept north, the Navajo met another people, the Pueblo. The Pueblo lived in villages of stone and clay, skilled in weaving, pottery, and prayer. But when the Spanish crushed their revolt in 1680, many Pueblo refugees fled and sought shelter among the Navajo. The 2 nations shared knowledge and struggle. The Pueblo taught the Navajo to weave fine cloth and shape painted pottery, while the Navajo offered protection and kinship. Together, they endured the storms of invasion and the long shadow of empire. With the Spanish came horses, goats, and sheep, and with them, a new chapter of Navajo life. At first, the horse was a creature of awe, swift as lightning, strong as thunder. But soon it became a companion in war, travel, and trade. The Navajo adapted quickly. Sheep gave them wool for weaving. Horses gave them reach across the desert. From conquerors, they took tools and turned them into survival. It was their way, to learn, to adapt, and to endure. Under the desert sun, the Navajo wove their stories into cloth. The sheep's wool became blankets and rugs, each pattern a prayer, each color a piece of their world. Their looms sang softly in the breeze of their canyon homes. Weaving became more than art. It became spirit. The woman at her loom was like the goddess Spider-Woman, who had taught the people the craft of creation itself. In every thread, the Navajo bound past and future, hardship and beauty into a single unbroken line. From their neighbors in Mexico, the Navajo learned another art, the shaping of silver. They melted coins, hammered metal, and set stones of turquoise that gleamed like sky captured in earth. Jewelry became not only adornment, but story, carrying the light of generations. Silver and weaving together define the Navajo spirit, strength in craft, patience in labor, and endurance in struggle. They did not conquer through war, but through creation, shaping beauty out of the hardest trials. Then came the dark year of 1864. American soldiers marched through Navajo lands under orders to destroy everything: crops, sheep, homes, even water sources. Starving and broken, thousands of Navajos surrendered, their freedom stolen by guns and hunger. They were forced to walk hundreds of miles to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, a place of dust and death. Many died along the way. Those who survived were confined behind fences, far from their sacred mountains. The Navajo remember it still as Hueldi, the long walk. But even despair can be undone by hope. In 1868, after years of captivity, the U.S. government signed a treaty allowing the Navajo to return to their homeland. Their tears watered the earth as they crossed back into the land of the four sacred mountains. From that day forward, they rebuilt, herding sheep, weaving cloth, crafting silver, teaching their children to speak the old language. The land was smaller, but their spirit was vast. The people had come home. When another war shook the world, World War II, the Navajo were called once again to serve. This time, their language became their weapon. The U.S. Marines trained Navajo men to send coded messages using their native tongue, a code no enemy could break. At Iwo Jima, Major Howard Connor declared, "If it weren't for the Navajo, the Marines would never have taken the island." Between 1942 and 1945, Navajo code talkers sent over 800 flawless messages. Their ancient words, once silenced, became the voice of victory. Today, the Navajo Nation stands proud, 27,000 square miles strong, the largest land held by any native tribe in the United States. Long before Texas had a name, the Comanche were part of another people, the Eastern Shoshone, who lived among the mountains of Wyoming. They were nomads, hunters of elk and deer, quiet wanderers between rivers. But around the year 1500, change came galloping from the south. The Spaniards arrived, bringing with them the horse. The Shoshone learned to ride, to hunt faster, to fight stronger. Among them, a group broke away, daring, restless, hungry for the open plains. They called themselves Comanche, meaning enemy, a name given by others but worn with pride. They would soon become the most feared riders the continent had ever seen. The horse changed everything. It was not just an animal. It was freedom on four legs. The Comanche rode like the wind, moving with the herds and striking before their foes could blink. What took others days, they crossed in hours. By the 1700s, their mastery of the horse was legendary. No other tribe could match their speed or skill. Children learned to ride before they could walk. A Comanche warrior could fire arrows from beneath his horse's neck, striking enemies while at full gallop. The horse became their weapon, their wealth, and their soul. As they spread southward, the Comanche claimed a vast domain, the Comancheria. It stretched from the Arkansas River down to central Texas and from eastern New Mexico to western Oklahoma. It was a sea of grass, herds, and glory. The buffalo grew fat on those plains, and the Comanche followed them like shadows. The land gave them everything: food, shelter, clothing. They were the kings of the prairie, and every tribe who heard their hoofbeats trembled. The Comanche did not wait for battle to come. They carried it to their enemies. Under the full moon, when the plains shimmered silver, they rode silently in from the horizon. These attacks became known as Comanche Moon. When even settlers hid behind locked doors, they raided for horses, for captives, for revenge. To be captured by the Comanche was to face a hard fate, for they treated prisoners as property, traded for goods, or kept as slaves. The night belonged to them, and every hoofbeat was a warning in the wind. The Apaches once ruled the southern plains, but the Comanche rose like a storm. For years, the two tribes fought, blood for blood, camp for camp. The battles were fierce, and their hatred burned like the sun. By the late 1700s, the Comanche had driven the Apache far south and west, out of their ancestral plains. The governor of Texas, Domingo Cabello, wrote in 1784 that the Apaches had been defeated after a 9-day battle in northwestern Texas. The Comanche now stood alone, unmatched masters of the grasslands. Their dominance drew the eyes of traders, French, Spanish, American. The Comanche became both raiders and merchants, selling horses and buffalo hides for guns, blankets, and silver. They could strike one camp at dawn and trade peacefully at dusk. But they were no unified empire. Each band was its own nation, guided by its own leaders, yet bound by a shared tongue and pride. Sometimes they fought among themselves. Sometimes they joined forces against a common foe. Their independence was both their strength and their flaw. Even the strongest cannot fight what they cannot see. Between 1817 and 1849, the Comanche were struck by waves of disease, smallpox, cholera, and measles, brought by settlers and soldiers. Villages that once rang with laughter fell silent. From a population of nearly 20,000, they dwindled to about 7,000. Warriors grew weak, children faded. The buffalo herds also began to thin, hunted by white men for profit. The Comanche world, once so vast, began to shrink like a shadow at sunset. The United States wanted the Comanche lands, and treaties meant nothing. In the 1860s, the government promised to protect the buffalo, but the hunters kept killing. When the Comanche struck back in Texas, in what became the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, the Army answered with force. The Red River War began, a brutal campaign to crush the last free tribes of the plains. Soldiers burned villages, shot horses, and slaughtered buffalo. By 1875, the plains were empty. The buffalo were gone, and with them, the old Comanche life. In May 1875, the last free band of Comanche warriors surrendered. Their leader rode into Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and handed over his rifle, the final symbol of freedom. The great Comancheria was gone, replaced by fences and sorrow. By the census of 1890, only 1,598 Comanche remained at Fort Sill. The horsemen who once ruled the winds now walked on foot, herded into reservations. Yet even broken, they carried their pride. The spirit of the plains could not be fenced. When the world burned again in the 1940s, Comanche men went to war wearing U.S. uniforms. They fought in Europe and the Pacific, carrying the courage of their ancestors across oceans. Some served as code talkers, using their native tongue to send unbreakable messages. By then, many Comanche had moved to cities in California and New Mexico, seeking new lives. Yet every year, they gathered to dance, to drum, to remember. The buffalo were gone, but the heartbeat of the plains still echoed through them, proud, fierce, eternal. Long before their names struck fear and reverence across the plains, the Cheyenne lived in the wooded lands of Minnesota and along the Missouri River. They built homes of logs covered with earth, grew corn and pumpkins, and hunted in the forest. Their world was quiet, a balance of field, water, and sky. They called themselves Tsitsistas, meaning our people. But the peace of their lakes soon broke. The Ojibwe and other northern tribes pressed against them, and conflict drove the Cheyenne westward. By the late 1600s, they began their long migration into the unknown. As they journeyed toward the setting sun, the Cheyenne shed their old ways and learned new ones. They found the buffalo herds of the Great Plains, endless, roaring, and wild. Horses, brought by the Spanish, transformed them from farmers into riders. They became hunters of the plains, swift and fearless. The earth lodges were replaced by teepees. The hoe was traded for the bow. Yet they carried with them a sacred gift, 4 holy arrows, symbols of their covenant with the spirits. These arrows, they believed, held the power to bless the hunt and protect them in war. The Cheyenne moved southward into the grasslands of the Missouri and Red Rivers. But the plains were not empty. Other tribes, the Sioux, Arikara, and Mandan, fought to hold their ground. The Cheyenne's courage was tested in battle after battle, yet they endured. By the 1700s, they had become a nation of riders and warriors, their fame spreading far. Their alliances shifted with the winds, but their unity remained strong. Every raid, every hunt, every council was bound by their belief in balance, honor, and the sacred arrows that guided them. In 1832, as pressure grew from settlers and soldiers, the Cheyenne divided into two great bands. The Northern Cheyenne settled along the Platte River near the Black Hills, while the Southern Cheyenne moved down toward the Arkansas River in Colorado. Each group kept the same heart, the same language, the same prayer to the Great Spirit. Yet fate would test them separately. The Southern Cheyenne would soon face betrayal and blood under a sky they once called home. On the open plains, friendship and treachery walked side by side. The Cheyenne fought the Kiowa and Comanche for years. Fierce battles that left the rivers red. Then, in 1840, peace came. An alliance was forged between the Cheyenne, Kiowa, Apache, and Comanche. But peace was fragile. In 1851, under the Fort Laramie Treaty, the U.S. government promised land in northern Colorado, from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs. It seemed a new era might dawn. Yet as gold glimmered in the mountains, settlers flooded in, and promises turned to ash. By the mid-1850s, the Cheyenne were pushed from their lands once again. Starvation and anger rose. When gold seekers ignored the treaty boundaries, the Cheyenne struck back, raiding wagons and settlements. The U.S. Army answered with vengeance. In 1857, near the Solomon River, Cheyenne warriors led by a healer named White Bull charged the American cavalry. They believed their sacred medicine would make them invincible. But sabers and bullets tore through their faith. The Cheyenne fled, their villages burned, and winter stores destroyed. The Colorado War had begun. On November 29, 1864, under a cold dawn, peace-seeking Cheyenne families camped along Sand Creek in Colorado. They had raised a white flag, a symbol of trust. Yet Colonel John Chivington and his Colorado volunteers attacked without warning. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. The creek ran red for miles. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. From that day, the Cheyenne's sorrow turned to fury. The plains would burn again, for the spirits demanded justice. The massacre at Sand Creek forged warriors of vengeance. The Cheyenne joined forces with the Lakota Sioux and the Arapaho, raiding forts and settlements across the plains. The most famous of these battles came in 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn. There, under the command of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, the Cheyenne fought beside their Sioux allies. On that fateful June 25th, they destroyed Custer's 7th Cavalry, leaving only silence and smoke. The victory was swift, but the retaliation that followed would be merciless. After Little Bighorn, the U.S. Army struck back with overwhelming force. The Northern Cheyenne were forced south to a reservation in Oklahoma. There, sickness and death took many. Malaria spread through the camps, and the heat was unbearable. In 1878, two chiefs, Dull Knife and Little Wolf, led nearly 1,000 Cheyenne on a desperate flight north toward their homeland. Pursued by soldiers, starving and cold, they fought and died along the way. But some made it, and in 1884, the U.S. government finally created a reservation for them in Montana. Today, the Cheyenne lie divided but united in spirit. The Northern Cheyenne remain in Montana's Tongue River Reservation, and the Southern Cheyenne share a homeland in Oklahoma with their old allies, the Arapaho. They gather still to honor the sacred arrows and the stories of their ancestors, the farmers who became warriors, the hunters who became legends. Through centuries of fire and betrayal, the Cheyenne people endure, their songs rising once more into the endless sky of the plains. In the deserts and high peaks of the Southwest, from eastern Arizona to northern Mexico, from New Mexico to western Texas, lived the Apache, a people born of endurance. They were wanderers of stone and sand, hunters of the mountains, and guardians of a harsh but sacred land. They were kin to the Navajo, speaking a related Athabascan tongue, descended from those who had journeyed south from Western Canada centuries before. In the Apache tongue, the wind was spirit, the mountain was ancestor, and the earth was mother. The Apache were hunters and gatherers, moving with the rhythm of the seasons. They followed the herds, gathered fruits, and planted when the rains allowed. Their homes were wickiups, dome-shaped shelters of saplings and grass, and when they needed to move, they built teepees, light and swift to carry. Dogs first bore their loads on wooden frames called travois, but with the coming of horses, life transformed. Horses carried homes, weapons, and dreams across the desert. The Apache learned to move faster, farther, stronger, ghost-like through the canyons and plains. When the Spaniards arrived in the 1500s, they brought thunder, muskets, iron, and horses. The Apache learned quickly, mastering these gifts and turning them into tools of war. The horse gave them wings over the desert, and soon they became the swiftest raiders in the Southwest. To their enemies, the Apache were shadows, striking from nowhere, vanishing into the rocks and ravines. To their people, they were protectors. Their lives were hard, but their pride was harder. The name Apache came not from their own lips, but from others, from the Zuni word Apache, meaning enemy. Yet the Apache carried the name with honor, for they had never been conquered. They fought the Spanish, the Mexicans, and finally the Americans, each empire rising and falling like waves against their unyielding cliffs. They were fierce because they had to be. Their land was dry and unforgiving, and freedom was their only treasure. Each raid, each skirmish was a statement. We are still here. By the 1700s, the Apache rode out against anyone who threatened their survival. They raided for horses, cattle, and weapons. The Comanche, newly powerful with their own horses, became deadly rivals, pushing the Apache south and west. Driven into the mountains, the Apache struck back with cunning and endurance. Their raids became legend, swift, silent, and merciless. Settlers feared the sight of smoke on the horizon, for it meant the Apache were near. Among the Apache were many tribes: the Chiricahua, the Mescalero, and the Jicarilla. Each held its own territory, its own pride. The Chiricahua made their home among the rugged peaks of southeastern Arizona. The Mescalero roamed the high deserts of New Mexico and Texas. The Jicarilla dwelled in the north. Each tribe lived free, following the old ways, trusting only their leaders and the spirits. Democracy ruled their camps. A chief led only as long as his people respected him. The moment he lost their trust, he was no longer chief. When gold was discovered in California in 1849, settlers poured westward across Apache lands. Wagons filled the trails, guarded by soldiers and greed. The Apache struck back, raiding camps, destroying forts, refusing to bow. The U.S. government demanded submission. Treaties were signed, then broken. Reservations were built, then invaded. Between 1861 and 1886, the Apache Wars raged, a struggle of defiance against a rising empire. The mountains became battlefields, and every canyon echoed with the cries of resistance. Among all Apache warriors, none became more feared or admired than Geronimo. Born in the Chiricahua band, he fought with fire in his eyes and sorrow in his heart. He had seen his wife and children slain by Mexican soldiers, and from that grief, his legend was born. For decades, Geronimo led raids across Mexico and the American Southwest. Soldiers chased him but never caught him. To the U.S. press, he was a phantom. To his people, a symbol of vengeance and freedom. But in 1886, cornered and weary, Geronimo finally surrendered, the last free Apache chief to lay down his gun. After surrender, the Apache were betrayed once more. The Chiricahua were taken as prisoners of war, not for months, but for decades. From the deserts of Arizona, they were shipped to Florida, Alabama, and finally to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. For 27 years, they lived under guard, far from their mountains. In 1913, they were given a choice to settle in Oklahoma or return west to the Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico. They had lost their lands, but not their dignity. Even in captivity, they held their heads high. The new century rose with the sound of trains and telegraphs, but the Apache spirit did not fade. In the 2000 U.S. Census, nearly 57,000 people proudly called themselves Apache, and another 40,000 carried mixed ancestry. They lived in Arizona and New Mexico, farming, ranching, teaching, building, yet always remembering. Their stories, once whispered around campfires, now echo in schools and museums. The Apache, like the Sioux, the Iroquois, the Navajo, the Comanche, and the Cheyenne, remind the world that freedom is not land or gold. It is the will to endure. Though centuries have passed, the warriors of the desert wind still ride in memory, fierce, proud, and forever unbroken. Across the continent, from the Black Hills to the Rio Grande, the spirits of the old nations remain. The Sioux still dance for Wakantanka. The Iroquois still keep the great law. The Navajo still walk in beauty beneath their 4 sacred mountains. The Comanche still honor the horse. The Cheyenne still guard the sacred arrows, and the Apache still whisper their prayers to the wind. Though the world has changed, their stories are not lost, for history remembers those who refused to vanish. The land itself still hums with their names, carried by rivers, sung by wind, and written forever into the heart of America. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more forgotten tales from the past, please like, share, and subscribe to Echoes Beneath. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story whispered from history's shadows.